Picture this: a blade catching morning light, a woman's breath fogging in the cold air, thousands of eyes watching in dead silence. This isn't a nightmare. This is England, 1536, and a queen is about to lose her head. But here's what haunts historians to this day. Another queen, one who fought the same king just as hard, maybe harder, died peacefully in her bed. Same monarch, same defiance. Two completely opposite endings. What made one woman untouchable while the other became the most famous execution in English history? The answer isn't what you think. It's darker, stranger, and reveals how power actually works when crowns and survival collide. Stick around because this mystery has layers that still shock people 5 centuries later. Tower Green, May 19th, 1536. Morning mist hasn't lifted yet. A woman walks toward a wooden platform built specifically for her death. She's dressed like she's heading to some fancy gala, rich fabrics, expensive trim, her hair carefully arranged under a pure white cap. Anne Boleyn, Queen of England for exactly 3 years, is about to be beheaded. The crowd isn't screaming. Nobody's throwing anything. It's eerily quiet, like everyone's holding their breath. She addresses them, her voice steady, praising the king who literally just ordered her killed, calling him merciful, actually using that word. Then she kneels down, removes the outer layer of her dress and positions herself. A French swordsman, specially imported because he's supposedly more skilled, more humane than the usual guys, swings once. Clean strike. Her head separates from her body. The Queen of England is dead. Now this isn't just another execution. This is the woman Henry VIII tore his entire kingdom apart to marry. He spent 7 years fighting the Pope, breaking England away from the Catholic Church, becoming the supreme religious authority himself, all to make Anne Boleyn his wife. 7 whole years of drama. 3 years later, she's accused of sleeping with 5 different men, including her own brother. Accused of witchcraft. Accused of plotting to murder the king. And now she's dead on a scaffold. But here's where it gets really weird. 4 months before Anne's head hit the scaffold, another queen died. Catherine of Aragon, Henry's first wife. The woman Anne replaced. Catherine spent 6 years fighting Henry's divorce. She defied him publicly, challenged his authority, refused to step aside, called him a liar to his face and to anyone who would listen. She was a total thorn in his side. Yet Catherine died in her castle. Alone, yeah. Separated from her daughter, absolutely. But in her bed, of natural causes, still insisting she was the real Queen of England until her last breath. Nobody laid a finger on her. 2 queens. Both denied Henry what he desperately wanted. Both stood in his way. Both humiliated him in front of the entire world. One gets a fancy executioner. The other gets to die naturally. Why? What protected Catherine that Anne never had? The answer reveals everything about how power, blood, and survival actually worked in the 1500s. And it's not the romantic explanation you're expecting. Let's talk about the woman nobody could touch. Catherine of Aragon wasn't some random noblewoman who got lucky. This woman was born into straight-up royalty. Her mom was Isabella of Castile. Her dad was Ferdinand of Aragon. These weren't just any nobles. These were the power couple who united Spain, funded Christopher Columbus's voyage to the Americas, and kicked the Moors out of Granada. Catherine grew up in actual palaces. She learned 6 languages, studied philosophy and theology like it was no big deal. She was literally trained from birth to be a queen. But here's what really mattered, what really kept her safe: her family connections. Her nephew was Charles V. And Charles V wasn't just some European prince. This guy was the most powerful man on the planet at that time. No exaggeration. He was the Holy Roman Emperor. He ruled Spain, Germany, Austria, the Netherlands, parts of Italy, and massive territories in the New World. If Henry hurt Catherine, Charles could invade England. Simple as that. This wasn't some empty threat. Everyone knew it. Henry knew it. His advisors knew it. Even Catherine knew it and used it like a shield. In 1534, something happened that showed just how bulletproof Catherine actually was. The Bishop of Durham came to see her. Henry had just declared himself head of the Church of England, totally breaking away from the Pope. He wanted Catherine to acknowledge this, to accept his authority over the popes. She straight up refused. The bishop lost his temper and threatened to hang her. Catherine didn't even flinch. She looked him dead in the eye and said, "Who will be the hangman? If you have permission to execute this penalty on me, I am ready." Just stone-cold defiance. The bishop said nothing. He just left, because she was right. They wouldn't dare touch her, but Catherine's protection went way deeper than just her nephew's armies. The English people genuinely loved her. This is actually crazy when you think about it. The English were famous for hating foreigners. They mocked French accents. They didn't trust Spanish merchants. They resented foreign influence at court. But they absolutely adored their Spanish queen. For 24 years, Catherine had been the perfect queen. She was super religious, prayed for hours every day. She wore simple clothes. She gave tons of money to the poor. She was intelligent and dignified. She never caused scandals. She never complained. When Henry went to war in France in 1513, he left Catherine in charge as regent. The Scots invaded while he was gone. Catherine didn't panic or freak out. She organized the entire defense of the realm. She sent money, artillery, and troops north. Her forces, led by the Earl of Surrey, absolutely crushed the Scots at the Battle of Flodden. The Scottish king himself died on the battlefield. Catherine sent Henry the dead king's blood-stained coat as a trophy. Let that sink in. The people saw her as basically a living saint. So when Henry tried to divorce her, the reaction was explosive. Women literally guarded her palace with pitchforks. They blocked the commissioners Henry sent to force her out. In the streets, crowds shouted, "Death to your enemies," when Catherine passed by. One priest was beaten nearly to death by his female parishioners just for praying for Queen Anne instead of Queen Catherine. The people were ride or die for Catherine. Henry knew what killing Catherine would mean. Riots, rebellions, maybe even civil war. And that's before Charles V got involved. Charles himself called Henry's divorce attempt the lust of a foolish man. He told the Pope that a good and blameless queen shouldn't suffer because of Henry's desires. If Catherine died violently, she'd become a martyr. Churches would make her a saint. Paintings would show her as this holy victim. Her story would inspire rebellions for generations. Henry couldn't risk that. The political cost was way too high. But Catherine had one more shield, one more layer of protection. And this one was absolutely brilliant. She used Henry's own argument against him. Henry claimed their marriage had never been valid. He said that marrying his brother's widow violated God's law. He insisted Catherine had never really been his wife. Therefore, their daughter Mary was illegitimate. Catherine listened to all this, then she made her move. "I am no English woman but a Spaniard born," she declared. Think about what this meant. If their marriage wasn't valid like Henry claimed, then she wasn't his wife. If she wasn't his wife, she wasn't his subject. If she wasn't his subject, English law didn't apply to her. She was a Spanish princess living in England, a foreigner, and foreigners could appeal to Rome. They could go over the king's head straight to the Pope, which is exactly what Catherine did. In 1529, Henry established a court in England to settle the marriage. Cardinal Wolsey would preside. The outcome was supposed to be certain. Henry would get his annulment. Catherine refused to attend. She said, "I will not be judged by you. I appeal to Rome." Henry's lawyers were furious, but what could they do? By Henry's own logic, she wasn't bound by English law. This made Henry so mad that in 1534, with Thomas Cromwell's help, he passed new laws saying no one could appeal to Rome anymore. All religious authority belonged to the king now. Catherine ignored him. She said, "I'm not the king's subject. These laws don't apply to me." And she kept writing to the Pope. It was pure legal genius. She'd turned Henry's divorce argument into a shield. She'd made herself legally untouchable. So Henry had a problem. He couldn't execute her without starting a war. He couldn't legally force her to obey. He couldn't even make her stop calling herself queen. All he could do was isolate her, move her to smaller and smaller castles, keep her away from her daughter and hope she'd die naturally. And eventually she did, but peacefully, in her bed, still calling herself the true Queen of England. Now let's talk about the woman who had absolutely none of these protections. Anne Boleyn came from a totally different world. She was born in England to a minor noble family. Her dad was Thomas Boleyn, a diplomat, ambitious, clever, but not powerful, not by royal standards anyway. Anne had zero royal blood. She had no foreign army backing her. She had no emperor for an uncle. Everything she became because of Henry. And what Henry gave, Henry could take away. That's the crucial difference right there. Anne spent her teenage years in France. She served in the French court. She learned French manners, French fashion, French wit. When she returned to England in her early 20s, she stood out. She was sophisticated, sharp, different. Henry noticed her big time. Anne Boleyn was serving as a lady-in-waiting to Queen Catherine when the king's eyes fell on her. At first, he wanted her as a mistress, just like he had taken her sister Mary Boleyn before her. But Anne had seen what her sister went through, praised, used, and then forgotten. She wanted no part of that, so she left the court and went back to her family home at Hever Castle, hoping the king's interest would fade. But it didn't. Henry began writing her letters. Love letters filled with passion, devotion, and promises. He sent her gifts. In Tudor England, saying no to a king was seriously dangerous. Yet Anne stood her ground. She refused to be his mistress. If he truly wanted her, he would have to make her his wife. It was a bold move, part resistance, part survival. But Henry didn't take it as rejection. He took it as a challenge. His desire turned to straight-up obsession. If he couldn't have her as a mistress, he would have her as his queen. 7 years. That's how long Anne made him wait. 7 years of negotiations with the Pope. 7 years of arguments with advisors. 7 years of turning England completely upside down. Finally, in 1533, they married. That same year, she was crowned Queen of England. She was pregnant. Surely this child would be the son Henry desperately wanted. The baby was a girl, Elizabeth. Henry tried to hide his disappointment. There would be other children, other chances. But Anne's position was always shaky, always precarious, because everything about her situation was different from Catherine's. She had no powerful family to protect her. The Boleyns had risen because of Anne. If Anne fell, they'd fall with her. They couldn't save her because they only existed through her connection to Henry. And then there was her reputation. While Catherine was seen as a saint, Anne was seen as, well, something very different. Most people saw her as the woman who destroyed a good marriage, the woman who'd seduced the king away from his faithful wife, the woman who'd caused Catherine suffering. They called her the king's whore. They called her the scandal of Christendom. Even in Rome, the Pope's court spoke of her with disgust, calling her a woman sent to lead England into sin. Foreign queens refused to meet her. When Henry and Anne traveled to Calais to meet the French court, King Francis welcomed them. But his wife, Queen Eleanor, refused to receive Anne. So did his sister, Queen Marguerite of Navarre. Anne was left waiting in Calais, totally humiliated, while Henry met with the French court alone. In England, the hatred was even worse. When Anne appeared in public, crowds turned their backs. Women shouted curses from the streets. Some even threatened to drag her down. People muttered prayers for Queen Catherine and called Anne the usurper queen. Everywhere she went, she could feel the eyes of a nation that wanted her gone. Nobody loved Anne enough to fight for her. And when the accusations came, adultery, incest, treason, people were ready to believe them. Of course she did it. What else would you expect from the king's whore? Even people who hated her doubted the charges. The Spanish ambassador, Chapais, had hated Anne for years. He'd called her every terrible name he could think of. But even he admitted later that the evidence against her seemed weak. That most of the men accused with her probably hadn't confessed to anything. That only Mark Smeaton, the musician, had admitted to sleeping with her. Yet Chapais didn't speak up for her. Why would he? She'd been his enemy, Catherine's tormentor. let her face her fate. So when Henry turned on Anne, she had nowhere to run. She was English, undeniably completely English. No foreign citizenship to claim, no legal loopholes to exploit, no court in Rome to appeal to. English law applied to her fully. And English law said that adultery by a queen was treason. Treason meant death. Anne was trapped in England, trapped by her nationality, trapped by her reputation, trapped by her complete dependence on Henry. When that favor vanished, she was defenseless. When Anne died, no foreign power stepped in. France and the Empire didn't mourn her. They smirked from afar, pleased to see England weaken itself by executing its own queen. But why did Henry choose execution? Why not just end the marriage quietly? He could have divorced her, exiled her, or even locked her away like King Henry II once did to his defiant wife, Eleanor of Aquitaine. So why kill her? That's where the story turns truly dark. Henry had options with Anne. Easy options. He could have annulled the marriage. The grounds were there. He'd slept with Anne's sister Mary before marrying Anne. By church law, that was incest. It made the marriage invalid, or he could have used the pre-contract. Anne had been informally engaged to Henry Percy years earlier. That engagement had never been properly dissolved. Another ground for annulment. Or he could have sent her to a convent, made her a nun. The marriage would be over. Elizabeth could remain legitimate. In fact, when Anne was imprisoned in the Tower, she begged for exactly this. She said she'd go to a convent, she'd give up everything, just let her live. Henry refused. It had to be an execution. It had to be adultery and treason. It had to be the ultimate punishment. Why? Let's look at the reasons, the cold calculations behind a queen's death. The first option, annulment, was the one Henry couldn't stomach. If he admitted the marriage was invalid because he'd slept with Anne's sister Mary Boleyn, it would destroy his own image. He'd look like the sinner, not the victim. And Henry couldn't bear that. He wanted to appear innocent, misled by a deceitful woman. In Henry's mind, if Anne was guilty, then he was pure again. The devoted king who'd been tricked by lust and witchcraft. The victim, not the villain. This is the main reason for Anne's fast trial. He wanted her gone, and he wanted it fast. In favor of Henry, Anne already had the reputation of the king's whore. People already thought the worst of her. When Henry accused her of sleeping with 5 men, including her own brother, many people thought, well, what did you expect? Henry needed people to believe a story. And this story was the only story that would work with Anne. The second main reason was pride. This is the key. This is what explains the execution instead of annulment. Henry had fought for 7 years to marry Anne. He'd defied the Pope. He'd broken with Rome. He'd made himself a whole new church structure just to make Anne his wife. He'd made himself a laughing stock across Europe. Ambassadors had mocked him. Foreign courts had condemned him. And he'd done all this while claiming he was right and God wanted him to marry Anne. That his first marriage to Catherine had been invalid because it violated divine law. If Henry now annulled his marriage to Anne, what would that prove? That he'd been wrong all along. That he'd thrown away his first marriage, alienated the Pope, and revolutionized England's church for nothing. For a woman he shouldn't have married in the first place. His ego couldn't accept that. So instead he changed the story. He wasn't wrong to marry Anne, she'd deceived him. She'd seduced him, she'd betrayed him. She was the villain, not him. I was bewitched, he told one courtier. Some people have taken this to mean he thought she'd used actual witchcraft. But it probably just meant he'd been obsessed with her, fooled by her. Either way, the message was crystal clear. This wasn't his fault. It was hers. With Catherine, his ego demanded that she recognize the annulment, that she admit their marriage had been wrong. But he couldn't force her. So he accepted the stalemate. She'd stay queen in her own mind. Fine. With Anne, his ego demanded that she be guilty, that she be the betrayer, that he be the victim. And since he could force that narrative, he did. And the last reason was love and anger. Catherine never really challenged Henry except on the divorce matter. She'd always been submissive otherwise. She'd accepted his authority without question. She'd been a good wife for 20 years. She'd supported him. She'd advised him. She'd loved him genuinely. Yeah, he was frustrated with her, angry that she wouldn't agree to the divorce. But it wasn't personal hatred, it was political frustration. Anne was different. Henry had promised Anne the world, and Anne had promised him sons. She'd said she'd give him the male heir he desperately wanted. She'd been so confident about it, and she'd failed. 3 pregnancies, 1 living daughter, 1 miscarriage, 1 stillborn son. To Henry, this felt like betrayal. She'd lied to him. She'd promised what she couldn't deliver. And Anne, unlike Catherine, had been sharp-tongued. She'd argued with him. She'd been jealous when he looked at other women. She'd been proud and difficult. Henry felt personally betrayed by Anne in a way he never felt betrayed by Catherine. After Anne's execution, Henry destroyed everything connected to her. Every portrait, every letter, every gift. He erased her from the palace. He commanded that no one speak her name. He'd done nothing like that with Catherine. He'd kept her things. He was visibly affected when she died. According to Ambassador Eustace Chapais, Henry showed some sorrow. The rage he felt toward Anne was personal, visceral. And when rage combined with opportunity, it meant death. But there's one more piece to this puzzle. One more thing that sealed Anne's fate. By 1536, Anne Boleyn wasn't just an unloved wife. She was a political problem. Her last miscarriage had been a boy, the son Henry had prayed for. When he died unborn, the court began whispering that God had cursed the king. Even worse, Anne had made enemies everywhere. Nobles, priests, even her own allies. The Boleyn family, once untouchable, was losing its grip on power. In their place rose the Seymours, led by the quiet and obedient Jane Seymour, a woman who represented everything Anne wasn't. While Anne argued with ministers and mocked Henry in public, Jane bowed, curtsied, and waited. The contrast humiliated Henry. It reminded him that the fiery queen who once thrilled him now challenged him. Then came Thomas Cromwell. Once Anne's ally in reform, he'd turned against her. They clashed over church wealth and foreign alliances. Anne wanted friendship with France. Cromwell wanted peace with the Empire, Catherine's nephew. To keep his own power, Cromwell needed Anne gone, and he knew exactly how to do it. He built a case so shocking that no one dared question it. Adultery, incest, treason. 5 lovers, including her own brother. Impossible charges, but perfectly believable to a court that already despised her. We've seen all the pieces now. Let's put them together. Henry had loved Anne once obsessively, but he loved Catherine too in a different way for longer. But it wasn't about love. Love didn't kill Anne, and lack of love didn't save Catherine. It wasn't about defiance. Both women defied Henry. Catherine refused the divorce for 6 years. Anne didn't even commit the crime she was accused of. She'd argued with Henry. She'd been difficult. She'd criticized his affairs with other women, but she wasn't unfaithful. Both women stood up to him. Only one died for it. The difference was power, protection, possibility. And here's the final truth, the darkest one. Henry could kill Anne without consequences, but Catherine was his equal in royalty. A Spanish princess, daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella, the most powerful monarchs in Europe. She wasn't some court woman he could discard. She was a queen born of kings. Catherine knew this. She used every advantage she had. That's why she dared the Bishop of Durham to execute her. She knew they wouldn't. She knew she was untouchable, and never had that chance. She probably knew it too. In the end, when they came to arrest her, when they brought her to the Tower, when they accused her of impossible crimes, she knew that everything she had depended on was Henry's favor. When that favor vanished, she was defenseless. But history has been kinder to Anne than her own time was. We remember her now as Elizabeth I's mother, as the woman whose daughter became England's greatest queen. We question whether the charges against her were true. Most historians think they weren't. But at the time she was just a woman who'd risen too high and fallen too fast. A cautionary tale, a scandal to be forgotten. Catherine, meanwhile, is remembered as Henry's true wife, the one who never surrendered, the one whose daughter eventually wore the crown. She lost the battle but won the war. 2 women, 2 fates, 1 king. The difference wasn't character. It wasn't virtue. It wasn't even guilt or innocence. The difference was bloodline. The difference was who would fight for them when the king turned against them. Catherine had an empire. Anne had nothing. And in Tudor England, that meant everything. If this story got you hooked, let us know in the comments which queen's story hits you harder. Catherine's stubborn defiance or Anne's tragic fall. And smash that subscribe button for more untold history, because the past is loaded with mysteries waiting to be understood. And we're just getting started.